because you're jumping back into the gap. Outlet to coach, it's either sideline, 2 on the side, 3 on the side. That's off the second cut. Lead the country in offensive rebounding.
Hey coach, welcome to the Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Oliver. Let's share the game. Happy New Year, Coach. Whether you're an old or new fan, thanks for supporting the Basketball Podcast. We look forward to a great 2020. One coach emailed me over the holidays, told me, Coach, we have more wins already than all of last year. Even better, they're against teams we have never beat in the past. All thanks to full basketball immersion, as I like to say. Simply put, basketball immersion has made new to basketball girls into really good basketball players. We have been playing some beautiful basketball, which is crazy to think back in March when I was trying to guess where on the schedule we could get a win. Thanks for all you do in sharing the game. Well, I'm grateful for Coach for sharing that, and I look forward to some great success for all of you in 2020. Enjoy the podcast. Coach's real treat today, Peter Lonergan here from Basketball Australia. He's the head of high performance and coach development. And Peter, you're a tremendous share of the game, and coaches around the world have watched your videos and read your clinic notes. So we're honored to have you on here.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be on. This has been such a huge source of learning and development for me, listening to your pod and looking at your website. So it's great to be part of it.
Well, it's absolutely been amazing and helped me connect with people like you. And we've connected a while back, but just finally getting you on as a guest. And so many ways we can go with this conversation. I wanted to start with something I feel is really important, and that's your concept of more dynamic form shooting, which I think you call Kaizen. Can you outline that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I first saw it in Russia at a pro club in Kaizen, and it fascinated me because I've long been a strong advocate of the importance of form shooting. I say to coaches, really, you need 6 to 8 minutes of form shooting in each practice. But I was also always aware how boring that was for players. So I saw it was a youth coach doing a series of very simple drills, but a bit more dynamic, a bit more engaging, and I think connect the mental and the engagement with the physical. So as we do, I stole it and started to espouse the merits of it.
Well, and the one thing that I really like about it, I mean, you already talked about player enjoyment, is it seems at the same time engaging as it is, you're really just focusing on the same form shooting that you would do in a really static stand by the basket and shoot situation. And I'm assuming that's your reflection from the players that you've worked with, is that they seem to enjoy it as a challenge.
Yeah, well, you see you think about over the years of doing form shooting, you look at the body language of the players and they're like, oh, not this again, surely. We don't have to we stand around and do this again. So just the fact that they can add a bit of creativity to it, they can, there's a bit of movement. There's an element of challenge that it's not just standing underneath the basket and trying to get 5 swishes in a row. And also the concept of form shooting is practicing things in a controlled environment that are going to happen in a game. So even though it is a controlled environment, you need to add an element of dynamic movement and an element of change.
And just to define it a little bit for people, this could be 1 foot, this could be off balance, this could be turning to shoot, this could be some type of foot movement prior to a shot. And it makes it more random and variable while still, again, you as the coach can still make coaching interventions while they're doing this, correct?
Oh, for sure. And I think that's the other thing is, often we put that 6 minutes on the clock and we say to the players, okay, get your form in. And we look at the practice plan or we talk to one of our assistants. So, we're not displaying the value that we're trying to espouse to the players. So one, I think that the coaches need to stay engaged. They don't have to overcoach. They don't have to micromanage it, but they have to be present, make corrections, but allow the players to explore and develop that feel and muscle memory just in a different setting.
I'm going to share a few things. Number one, and I would love to get your thoughts on this, with traditional form shooting, stand there 2 feet from the basket, repeat the same shot over and over again. Again, not just the mundane nature. And there's a certain amount of all skill development's boring, but in this example, I find it not applicable to the game. So and I don't remember where I've adapted this, but we've moved all form shooting out to about 10 to 13 feet. Just because when you're close to the basket, it doesn't really represent the same shot you would shoot. You would never shoot a traditional two-hand shot close to the basket. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the 2-3 foot from the basket is really about visualization, seeing the ball going through the net, which is still important. But yeah, I agree. I think you teach and drill shooting in 3 phases: form/technique, then volume, where you need to get your reps, and then situational. But in the form, there's no reason that it can't be off the catch. There's no reason that it can't be off the bounce. And there's no reason that it can't be 2 to 3 meters from the basket. It's still a controlled environment. You're still trying to close the skill somewhat, but it's more realistic. And as you say, in the game, there's never a jump shot from 2 foot from the basket. It's just something that never happens. Yet, it's funny with coaching. We as a coaching fraternity have been doing it for 50 years. We're maybe a bit slow on the uptake.
Well, and we often start practice with it too, which I always found intriguing. And since kind of thinking about the game, I've certainly moved away from that as well. Starting from a place where they wouldn't apply it in a game.
Yeah, and the other thing is too, often for years, I would do it as pre-practice, before we've even started a physical warm-up or whatever else. And if you think about the common sense of that, it doesn't make any sense. So I've tended to move it into the practice a little bit more. So get them up and down. The trainer might take their warm-up. You might even do something like weaves or a simple, and then you go into it because the heart rate's up. There's the challenge of refocusing on a very basic skill. So, yeah, I just think we have to, like all coaching and something that you do so tremendously well, just reassess how we do it. Doesn't mean that we've been doing it wrong, but we certainly should always be reassessing our approach.
The other thing that I've really spent a lot of time with is never shooting a form shot with the offhand down, like we used to traditionally do, and maybe you still do, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, just one hand up. And what I found is because when you drop your off arm, or when coaches traditionally put that off arm behind your back, it really puts tension in your opposite shoulder, which you would never feel shooting. And I found that messed me up a lot as a young person, as coaches tried to teach me to shoot with my elbow facing the rim. So there's another thing, is that if we do form shots with one hand, we always have the offhand on the side, not touching.
Yeah, no, definitely, because one, it's that transfer of I guess, tension into the shooting shoulder, the shooting arm, I agree. But also, if you think about how we've done it for so long, you have to start that shot with your hand underneath the ball, almost to create a cupping environment. And again, that's not something that happens in a game. So, yeah, no, it's something that I did as a young coach and probably did for a long time. But again, as you reassess and you watch videos and you talk to people, and we just had one of your friends and colleagues out here, Dave Love, who really has had a strong impact on the way we approach shooting, and everything he does is from a game sense and common sense environment.
Dave Love is tremendous, and I know he has such a great experience when he goes over there, and he gets stimulated as much as he shares. So it's tremendous. And I just want to repeat this. You said technique, volume, situational, which I love the way I've read that before, that you put that together. And I think that's tremendous for shooting. But that generally applies to a lot of other things you would teach in the game as well, right?
Oh, for sure. And the situational is something that I think globally we're doing far better as coaches, trying to apply it. And I know it's one of your really strong platforms. Okay, how does this apply to the game? Does it replicate actions and decisions and things that happen in a game? So it's probably not, it's definitely not 1/3 technique, 1/3 volume, 1/3 situational. We probably want to make sure that we, in a situational setting, whether that's 2-on-2, 3-on-3, numerical advantage, disadvantage, that needs to be the bulk of our practice. But we still need to set the platform and make sure that we've got fundamentally sound players in the first 2 phases.
Well, that's such a great point. And, again, I think people misconstrue sometimes that I'm all situational. But again, I'm just like you, the foundation needs to be there. My thing sometimes with people is in that order of technique, volume, situational. We don't always have to progress it always in that order. We can mix that order within practice. So we don't always have to go A, B, C. Sometimes we can go C, A, B and challenge them and mix it in different ways.
Yeah, I agree with that. And again, that's something that all coaches, and I know myself, a lot of my mentors, college coaches, and I grew up coaching with a very structured practice plan, which I still value. And it would always be morphing through those three phases, but in that order. But we understand now the game's not played that way. And the random learning and challenging their cognitive thought process by doing things in different orders and is really important. So I think, so many practices succeed or fail at the practice plan, and coaches not being willing to reassess and maybe take some risks.
Well, we're going to get into that a little bit when we discuss mentoring and some of the things that you do so well. But you have so many great phrasings of things. And the one I want to share and I want to get your explanation of for coaches is skill is the foundation of joy. I just love that phrasing. Can you explain that a little bit to coaches?
Yeah, I always equate it to a game of bad tennis. So, for example, Chris, if you're really good at tennis, which I'm sure you are, and I'm really bad at tennis, which I know I am, we're not going to have much fun. You're going to serve, I'm going to miss it, point to you. You're going to serve, I'm going to hit it in the net, point to you. Now, initially, you're having a lot of fun because you're winning, but it doesn't take long that neither of us is having much fun because I don't have the skill to create joy. And if you equate that to our game, the ability to make plays, to be creative, that's where the real joy comes from. So, it's a lot of it is what Steve Kerr preaches with the Warriors, about that joy factor. And if you watch those players, they're unbelievably skilled, but they're unbelievably joyful. And, I just think it's something that coaches need to be more cognizant of. We've got to make it fun and we've got to try and create that level of joy. With that, you're going to have a higher level of learning.
Well, again, so important. Love it. Love the way you explain it and just the phrasing of that. And, again, another thing that you talk about is the Fantastic Five, which, again, for all levels, it's important. But the main part about this, and I'll let you just talk about the Fantastic Five first. What are those five things that you kind of emphasize in terms of youth development and player development in general?
Yeah, I was fortunate to have a great friend and mentor in coaching. His name's Rex Nottage, who's probably the most successful high school coach in Australian basketball. So I certainly need to credit him with Fantastic Five. But it's pivot, pass, dribble, shoot, guard your man. So they're the five elements of the Fantastic Five. And I've started using it almost as a checklist. If you want to assess how good a youth coach someone is, can you put a tick next to all those five in terms of how the players have developed and they've got a sound platform in all those areas? And if you break the game down, if you have got a sound platform in all those areas, you've got a chance to be a pretty good player.
And for me, the thing that connected the most was this concept that the way I phrase it is every dribbling drill is a footwork drill. And you talk about this a lot in terms of it's almost impossible to develop a player by isolating all these things.
Yeah, we talk about get more drill out of each drill, get more practice out of each practice. And, those combination drills are so important. Obviously, you're always going to prioritize one skill or one concept, but our game is the most dynamic game of all sports globally. So we can't teach it in a static environment. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think that's modern coaching. We've always got to make sure that we're applying common sense. The game's multifaceted. So why are we teaching it in single stages so often? And I think, in fairness, I think coaches are embracing that through clinics and through work that people like yourself do. That I think now there's a reassessment of how we approach teaching skill in particular.
100% agree. And I think Basketball Australia is leading the charge. I mean, I see so many coaches influenced by what you guys do there. Just applying these common sense things, as you say, which is mixing the game rather than just isolated training all the time. And in the development of players from all ages, right? This applies to all ages. And I think sometimes we think a new learner has to start from this isolate. And we're not saying don't isolate. It just doesn't need to isolate as long as some people think.
Yeah, that's right. And it's timing. It's not ignoring that. And I think some people, when you talk about this sort of learning environment, they think you're trying to throw away, the rote learning and throw away the platform teaching and the progressive teaching. It's certainly not the case, as you well know, that it's just trying to get to that joy quickly. And people have said to me, you're too focused on making it fun. They need to learn. I said, well, the two are intrinsic. Enjoyment and learning and growth, they're intrinsically linked. So it's just a matter of, okay, we've got the platform in place. How can we move this now to a situation where the joy and the enjoyment will drive the learning?
And I'm sure this is something you're focused on with Basketball Australia. And this has been my experience in Sweden and New Zealand and places around the world I've been able to go. The other part of this is retention, is that there's a constant challenge for organizations or clubs or, again, a body like Basketball Australia to retain players within your pyramid. And that's another part of this, is that we want to make it fun to retain them, don't we?
Oh, definitely. And like you, I'm fortunate enough to travel to many countries around the world, and the stories are usually, very much the same. How do we keep young players engaged? How do we keep them in the sport? How do we encourage them to have a lifelong love affair with basketball and move from playing into coaching or administration or officiating? And that comes from that engagement, joy, fun, whatever you want to call it. That's why we start playing. So if that's why we start, it's probably a pretty good platform to base most of our decision-making on.
Yeah, great stuff. And we'll kind of just segue a little bit into something that I know is near and dear to your heart, and this concept of developing coaches. Can you talk a little bit about your opinion of best practices in terms of helping to develop coaches?
Yeah, coach development's a crucial investment for all bodies in our sport. The sport can only, you and I are biased, but we think coaches are the key drivers in all of basketball. And we talk about that basketball should be athlete-focused, coach-driven, administrator-supported. So we have to make sure that we're investing enough in our coaches that they can continue to help drive the sport. I'm a big believer that learning is oxygen for any coach, more so now than ever. That coaches are desperate for more information, for more learning and teaching and development so they can be better at their craft. So I'm fortunate that I get to do this full time. My job is primarily to work with and develop and share and learn from coaches. So, we're lucky here that Basketball Australia really values it and invests heavily in it, and our state and territory bodies do the same. So it's just a fun environment to be in, as you know.
Well, in Basketball Australia, definitely one of the world leaders, and I think one of the early world leaders in coach development. And through that process, what are some things, I know you've talked about attending practices, mentoring, peer evaluations, different things like that. Can you go through some of the things that you think can help the coaches who are listening develop the most?
Yeah, well, I think attending practices is huge. And I was really fortunate to have a lot of generous people early in my coaching that just allowed me to watch practice and take notes and listen to their teaching cues. And that's the thing about attending practices. Yeah, you'll see a drill and some different things, and you might see some X's and O's that you can put into your practice. But by being there and being able to hear what's said and see the body language and the interventions, that's where the real learning happens. And now I still try and attend a lot of practices, and it's not the drills. The drills are great. It's not the X's and O's, they're great too, but it's those elite high-level coaches, their ability to take a lot of information and put it into a really succinct phrase and action terms. And I was fortunate enough in January to spend a day or two at Duke, and obviously Mike Krzyzewski one of the best in the world at his succinct communication. Everything's geared around action words. Everything's geared around instant understanding and engagement. And so I think attending practices is huge. Clinics is huge. We try and aspire to 40 or 50 clinics a year as a national body. This year we've had about 2,500 coaches attend clinics. And I think that's a huge part of it as well.
It's awesome. And every time I'm looking, there's a different clinic in Australia somewhere. And I'm grateful to be a part of that coming up soon in January as well. So I'm so excited to be immersed in that learning. What about in terms of mentorship? What are some best practices for coaches to be able to seek out a mentor? Because I know that's been so important in my life from day one of starting coaching, to have someone not on my staff, but someone independent of my staff be a mentor for me.
Yeah, it's huge. Having that person who's a critical friend, having that person who's an outside looking in, so they're not weighed down by the expectation of winning and losing. They're not weighed down by the day-to-day operation of and challenges of being on staff or in the team, I think is massive. And, I really encourage coaches to seek out a mentor. And it doesn't have to be Greg Popovich. It doesn't have to be Steve Kerr. It's just someone who you feel can connect with you, that's got a good, sound understanding of the sport, and is brave enough to share their thoughts and brave enough to challenge you and make you reassess in what you're doing. So, I think it's huge. And I used to think that mentoring environment needed to be organic, that it couldn't be synthetic, that you couldn't say, hey, Chris, go and see this person and ask them to be your mentor. I thought it needed to unfold a bit more naturally, but I've shifted on that now. I think if not everyone's got the confidence or the relationships to go and seek a mentor. So I think part of our responsibility at BA and my responsibility is to set up some mentoring structures so everyone can benefit from it.
No, it's so important. And again, all ages of coaches need someone in their life to be able to, again, independently evaluate, independently converse, because there's no question, no matter how good a staff I had, there's still an inherent bias within your coaching staff, right? Whether opinions have been, shared amongst the assistants or you've somehow biased their opinions. I mean, those independent variables are far more important in some sense to you moving forward in your coaching, right?
Yeah, in any staff, there's an element of group think. You're spending, so many hours together. And while everyone's got their own thoughts and everyone's an independent thinker and their own personality, it's actually quite important that you morph into that collective a little bit in that setting. Obviously, you don't want your assistants to be yes men, but at the same time, you can't constantly be in a situation of angst. So, for a staff to be functional, there has to be that ability to work together and arrive at a common thought process. So, having someone come from outside is key to make sure that you're continually reassessing.
Let's shift gears a little bit, if you don't mind, Coach, and get into something, again, I don't think I've talked about enough on here, and that's the concept of coaching interventions, is how coaches intervene and some of the best practices in terms of that. Because obviously it's a key element of all coaching is that we intervene to be able to help players, to be able to guide players, whatever the terminology may be. So what are your thoughts on coaching interventions in terms of some of the best practices coaches should be considering?
Yeah, it's something in the last couple of years I've spent a lot of time thinking about and trying to document the process. I've spent a lot of time speaking to a great friend and mentor of mine, Mike McKay from Basketball Canada, who's a really unique thinker about how we functionally coach on and off the floor. And I think part of interventions is your positioning. I see a lot of developing coaches, they just don't physically put themselves in a position, particularly in practice, to intervene, or their positioning is such that when they do intervene, it stops the flow of practice. So I constantly talk to young coaches, where are you standing? Can you, from where you're standing, from where you're coaching, can you see what the players see? Can you hear what they're saying? We have a term in Australia and called Coach on the Run. We encourage people to coach on the run. If it's a camp setting or you've got multiple assistants, we talk to people about corralling the court. So, it's funny, it's almost like offense. We want the coaches to have good spacing. We don't like coach huddles in the sense that, there's 2 or 3 coaches standing together, watching practice, talking about practice, but not having any impact or not intervening in it. And then when you get to the game, it's about how do you use timeouts effectively? How do you use dead ball situations effectively? How do you interact with your point guard? And that doesn't mean calling your point guard over on every dead ball, but it's body language. It's how you do that. And I think for coaches, researching, thinking about, talking about how you intervene, how you have an impact in every environment is massive.
Great information there. And by coach on the run, if you're alone in a practice or you only have one assistant, are you talking about continually moving so you can scan different areas and see the play?
Yeah, that, but also not continually stopping. And, you played and you understand every player hates when practice is stop, start, stop, start. So with coach on the run, can you keep the drill going and provide, a sound bite of information? Can you, rather than, stop a practice to give individual instruction to Chris Oliver, do I wait till Chris is on the sideline waiting to re-enter the drill and just get across his flight path and give him that point of detail? It's just making sure that your intervention doesn't create too many stoppages.
Well, and that brings up a great question. Maybe this relates to some of the sport experts that work with the Center of Excellence for you guys or whatnot. But what are the thoughts right now on summary feedback versus immediate feedback or bandwidth feedback delay, whatever you want to say, in terms of giving those interventions on the fly? Is it a blend? Is it one's better than the other, or does it vary by learner?
No, it's certainly a blend, but it's weighted towards that immediate feedback. And if you think about, one of the biggest tools in the modern game and feedback is video. And we know now that sitting in darkened rooms trying to watch video and have people cognitively learn and make change is folly. So, with a lot of our national teams and including our Centre of Excellence programs here, they'll have an iPad next to the court and they'll call a player out of a drill or out of a scrimmage or something, and they'll show them something, in a 2-minute flight path environment and then get them back in. And we're finding that's a lot better. You look in the NBA, how many times you see a vision of an assistant or a head coach with their laptop sitting courtside. So it's a non-confrontational setting or environment. It's a 3-minute thing, and then the player can immediately step on and hopefully make some change. So it's still a blend. You still need to have those feedback meetings and very specific documented process, but I think it's certainly morphing towards doing it on the run and making sure that it's constant and in small chunks, not big volumes of information.
That's awesome. Isn't technology wonderful?
Yeah, it is. I think sometimes video takes over, and I see a lot of young coaches, they're enamored by video, and I talk to them about coaching and they say, oh yeah, I've got some clips on that. And I said, yeah, but we could also have a conversation. So technology is great, but we need to strike that balance. It's still a people's environment.
Well, which is, again, back to the value of the coaching clinics and just the attendance and the interactions. And, again, a lot of coaches in North America seem to think coaching clinics are dead, and testament to what you guys have done that you've had such great numbers out to all the clinics. But that's another value of clinics, right? Is that interaction and that communication and those mini conversations, right?
Yeah, I was in Brisbane on the weekend and they did a great job, Basketball Queensland, in putting together a series of clinics. And we're having a break between 2 clinics. And I said to the manager, should we get started? And he said, in the stands. And there was, coins out where people were doing some X's and O's. People were having conversations. There was a group that had moved onto the court. So they were having their discussion in 3D. So we let that run for another 10 or 15 minutes because we thought, you know what, this is as good a learning as any presenter can provide. And it's that informal setting that it's important. One of the big themes we've had this year in our coach development is more conversations. it's just encouraging people to have more conversations about coaching.
So with my BI academies, we moved to no lecture longer than 20 minutes, and they're always followed by, a debrief. So some type of 8-minute, 10-minute interaction amongst small groups. And, the informal conversations are great, but as you know, sometimes coaches won't engage with people outside of their inner circle. So we felt we had to force that a little bit with these kind of 8 to 10-minute debriefs. Have you seen that with any other clinics or anything else that has worked in that way?
Yeah, we've tried to implement that in our coach education courses. We have a 3-phase process here in Australia, and we've realised that it was too lecture based, as you said, no lecture longer than 20 minutes. Well, we would have a series of 45 to 60-minute lectures on back to back, and in terms of teaching and learning methodology, it was just diabolical. So, we spend a lot more time in workshops, getting people in pairs or small groups, and just the vibe and the quality of those courses has improved exponentially just by doing that. And as you say, sometimes you've got to structure it that it's not people from the same club or even on the same coaching staff that are spending all day together, because there's a limitation to that learning, as we discussed before.
Oh, it's wonderful stuff. And Coach, I wanted to jump into, I know coaches always love the technical, tactical a little bit, and you have a tremendous way of putting things together for offensive structure, which I really like, which is your 6-point checklist for offensive structure. And I'll just quickly: opportunities in transition, spacing, inbuilt ball reversal, opportunity for dribble penetration, opportunity for post play, opportunity for shooters. Can you maybe go through them quickly? Maybe start with the first one, just opportunities in transition, and or maybe how this checklist even came about for you.
Yeah, well, it came about, like all young coaches, you fall in love with X's and O's, and you see something on TV, or you see something in the pro league here in Australia, and you think, oh, that's me. I'm going to do that. And, as a young coach, we just played so much 5-on-5, and what I mean by that is we never got anything early. We never got anything easy, because we were so worried about coming down and getting into this unbelievable X's and O environment and execute. And so I realized that wasn't working. And in talking to a great friend and mentor of mine, Rod Pop, I said, how do you arrive at your offensive philosophy? And he spoke about the tenets of offense and how things are linked. And I'm a voracious note taker. And as you probably know, I'm a voracious article writer. And early on in my career, I just wrote articles for myself. It was just a great way of getting my thoughts together and the intellectual process together. So transition, I think, is so important with young players. Everyone wants to run. Everyone wants to play in broken play. So I think that's really important. And I've actually gone away from using the word transition to more fast break, because similarly, I spent a lot of time teaching a secondary break, but we would slow down to run it. Didn't make any sense. That's our transition set, but we would slow down to execute this mythical X's and O's. So I'm big on checklists, and I just think that 6 points just allows you to continually check that you're moving along okay and that you're covering all the areas you should cover.
I love that. Spacing, pretty self-explanatory. Any points to add there?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time early talking about high and wide spacing. Again, my mentors were from, the motion offense school, and I was fortunate to learn in that setting. But, I talk more now about high, wide, and deep. Obviously the modern game, we use the corners a lot more. But I think we can learn so much about spacing from the NBA. If you look at what Milwaukee, the way they space the floor is elite. It's almost next level. So, yeah, but spacing is pretty self-explanatory. We need to make sure that we define the geography of the floor for the players so they know what we mean by spacing.
Love it. And inbuilt ball reversal. What's the inbuilt part?
Well, yeah, have we got something that is an automatic? Do the players understand that if there's nothing on the first side of the floor, there's no other decision to be made but to get it swung? And I found that, again, early on with X's and O's, you were so caught up, and the players were so caught up in trying to execute this, they just forgot that simple tenement of offense, of ball reversal. So does everyone know, when we need to swing it and how we need to swing it.
That's great. And I think another thing that's changed about the modern game is a little bit of this notion that too many ball reversals isn't necessarily beneficial either, right? Like if you have advantage, you need to attack. And I know that's a big part of your philosophy too. And that leads into opportunity for dribble penetration.
Yeah, well, dribble penetration is the hardest thing to defend in the modern game. The ability of players now and how creative they are with the ball in their hands. So I agree. I hear young coaches talk about first side, second side, third side. And of course, we play with a 24-second shot clock under the FIBA rules. And sometimes, those coaches that are talking about, get it to the third side of the floor. In other words, 2 full ball reversals. Well, you spend so much time doing that you've got 5 or 6 seconds of worthwhile offense at the end of the clock. So, yeah, get it swung and attack. And then, I think what the guys here do at the Centre of Excellence is they teach receiver principles and shooting floor spots really well. I've learned a lot from watching how they construct that. And that's the modern game. Drive it and find people open, whether that's, perimeter shot or now we talk about vertical spacing, the Clint Capella model, where someone can put pressure on the rim on penetration it's all fascinating stuff.
That's great. It's a lot of fun. I'm going to skip 5 and we'll come back to that one as the last part because I know we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about that. But building it from dribble penetration is obviously opportunity for shooters. That's one way to develop it. But what else are you talking about in terms of opportunity for shooters?
Yeah, well, can we screen for shooters? We as a nation play a lot of games in the Asian zone, so we get an opportunity to watch some of the great Asian nations, China, Korea. Japan is a rising beast in this zone and internationally. The way they use the flare screen to create shot and create long closeouts is fascinating. I love to watch players like JJ Redick and his ability to curl off staggers and use wide pin downs. And I think as the games morph towards that dribble penetration, we've lost that beautiful art of creating really high percentage opportunities for shooters using screens. So again, it comes down to balance. Let's create it off the dribble penetration, but let's make sure that we're still using the flare screen, that we're using the wide pin down and staggered screens to create those opportunities.
Well, I love that. And off the ball screening is not dead, and nor is post play, right?
Yeah, you'd hope not. We hear a lot about small ball. We hear a lot about 5 out, and again, reference the Bucks and what a great job they do in playing in that 5 out environment. But post play, if you saw at the World Cup, is still really key. We have Andrew Bogut playing in our league here, and his ability to play almost as a second point guard in that 5 spot is breathtaking to watch. His team's leading the league here, and people are playing through the post a little bit more in the international game. And I do think that teaching the skills there, the footwork and jump hook and the ability to pass from that spot is something that is probably falling away, that we need to bring back and open the conversation about that a little bit again.
Yeah, and as Basketball Australia, are we encouraging post-play development from young ages on up? I know it's a multi-skilled approach, but is that part of that multi-skilled approach?
Yeah, it is part of the multi-skilled approach. And in one way, and I did a clinic in Melbourne on Monday, and it was around post-play, but they had all their program players in it. And it's a great setting to teach pivoting. It's a great setting to teach stance. And it's a great setting to teach creating time and space with footwork. All those things are really valuable in every facet of the game. So, that's why I think it's still important that we expose players to those skills in that environment.
Well, I love that because in a way it makes teaching pivoting more interesting, right? Playing one-on-one in the post with different pivots and different constraints and pivots, or teaching pivots, makes it more interesting to learn pivoting. And I've talked about that commonly with what I call the back pivot, which is where you dribble into basically pivoting. And both of those make it more dynamic, which would circle back to what you said about shooting, right?
Yeah, and the pivoting is still a platform skill. It's still number one in that Fantastic Five, and And I think coaches struggle to find environments and settings to teach it. And I always say, just, okay, teach it from the post, teach it from the low block, teach it from the short corner, teach it from the elbow, and then you can apply that to the perimeter.
Great coaches in Australia, going back generations, great coaches in North America or Europe, going back generations, have always used small-sided games. So you and I did not invent this. And I love that you say that because it's so true. We're just maybe people that are bringing attention back to the fact that for some reason we moved away from it a lot within practices. But I love your take on that.
Yeah, well, again, it's, what is old is new again. And it's interesting in our country, in some of the other sporting codes, including our Australian rules football, that there's a big push on teaching small-sided games, and there's a lot of information around small-sided games. And I always laugh because I think, well, we've been doing this for 60 years. This is something that's been a foundation and a platform of basketball coaching globally for 60, 70 years. So, yeah, it's just a matter of bringing it back into the narrative and making sure that people don't forget the importance of playing 2-on-2, 3-on-3, or playing out a numerical advantage or disadvantage.
Well, and we both talk about that and explain to coaches what the value of playing out of, like, it's not traditional 11-man break, numerical advantage. You're talking about half-court situations where you start with a numerical advantage or you have a numerical disadvantage. Can you talk about the value of that?
Yeah, well, that's the game. And for a long time when we thought about numerical advantage, again, we thought about, 3-on-2 +1 continuous or 11-man break or those sort of drills, which are still fantastic drills. But the reality is the most important situations of numerical advantage or disadvantage are in the quarter court. It's when we're playing basketball. As soon as I beat my man, or we term it here, create a split. As soon as I create a split, we've got a situation of numerical advantage. How can we thrive in that? How can we make worthwhile decisions? So, we spend a lot of time, in a situation where the drill might start in a brief numerical advantage, then it's equal numbers, and then it finishes in a numerical disadvantage. Because that's the game. If you think about how the game unfolds, there's 200 situations, numerical advantage, disadvantage in every possession, in every game, sorry.
Right. And it's really about decision-making and developing decision-making. And to be able to make a decision, usually it involves having an advantage or disadvantage to be able to obviously leverage it or to be able to counter it. And that's the other part that is tremendous about numerical advantage or disadvantage.
Yeah, well, even if you think about if I make a worthwhile cut, that creates somewhat of an advantage and it puts the defense at a disadvantage. So how can we drill and practice and rehearse how we take advantage of that? And that's what it is. It's we talk about advantage and disadvantage. Well, what we're trying to define is, okay, how can we make a worthwhile decision to take full advantage of that advantage that we've created?
The other part of these small-sided games, which I think, we can talk about more touches, more chance to execute skills, more chance to have success, all those different things. But the other part that I know you've talked about, which I think is undervalued, is how much more creative players can be in these small-sided games than in 5-on-5. Is that a part of the emphasis for small-sided games within your philosophy?
Oh, definitely. We were fortunate enough to spend some time in Spain in the middle part of last decade. And from that tour, we watched a lot of practices. We coined the term sound creativity because, as we know, the Spanish are wonderful players. They have wonderful teams, wonderful coaches, and they play with just an instinctive creativity. It's not fancy, or it's not Larry. They just make the game sing, and we learn a lot from that. And we figured out that the best way to encourage that creativity is provide a level of success. So in a situation, a small-sided game, there's more touches, as you say. There's more opportunity for success, and success is one of the key foundations of learning. So, yeah, the creativity is huge. And I think if you watch any level of the modern game, from elite youth to AAU to college to into the pros and international, that's probably the thing that's at the highest level now, is that sound creativity.
Well, I love that you referenced Spain in that sense, because just Europe in general, when I've been over there, again, I think for a North American coach, I can't speak to Basketball Australia coaches, but for a North American coach, there tends to be this fascination with progression and these different skill levels and achievable levels before they get to the next thing. Whereas there, I found that they more often than not threw them in the deep end, and we're throwing one-hand passes and encouraging one-hand passes, for example, is just one skill at a really young age, and giving them that freedom of creativity and problem solving, right?
Oh, for sure. We've been really fortunate here that we've had a lot of influence from North America, and a lot of really generous coaches. But, we've been into the great basketball environments of Serbia to learn from their wonderful coaches, Spain, Italy, Greece. You see now the emergence of countries like Belgium and Finland. There's some coaches there just doing some wonderful things in terms of skill and concept development. So it's a great thing that the planet has shrunk, and never has the game been more global, and never have we been able to borrow and learn from so many different environments.
No, I love that. And you are a lifelong learner and a lifelong traveler, which is the other part. And what are some, we can talk about Basketball Australia and some of the videos and some of the different things for coaches in terms of resources, and we'll tag a few of them. But other than following you on social media, which I encourage people to do because you share a lot of links and a lot of great information, but where are some other areas where you can direct coaches to be able to find some of the resources that Basketball Australia and the different types of associations share?
Yeah, we have our coaching website, which is, I'm sure you'll have the link for, but it's coach.basketball.net.au. And we try and put 2 or 3 things on that a week in terms of blogs or articles. But, we also try and share as many of the videos as we can, clinics. We're really strong on FIBA's World Association of Basketball Coaches. That they have a phenomenal learning platform online on their website. And that allows you to get access to some of those phenomenal European coaches, but also South Americans, the rise of African basketball. So, they're 2 places that I'd encourage people to do, but also just Twitter. I think, people sometimes are a little critical of social media, but I think Twitter's the coach's best friend right now. There's some great sharing and learning in that environment for sure.
I couldn't agree more. Twitter to me is definitely the best place for learning for basketball coaches, and the interactions and, even some of the questioning, which I find valuable if it's done in the right way as well. So everyone ultimately has to form their own opinion and their own beliefs, but the interactions and kind of some of the divergent thinking that exists on it, social media is really important as well.
Yeah, I agree. And again, you welcome the dialogue, but as long as everyone's willing to reassess, it's people are going to have conflicting views. And that's the great thing about our sport. There's 10,000 correct ways to do it. And I think it's just being exposed to some of those different ways and being open to it. You might not agree with it, but it certainly can help you think the game a little bit more.
Coach, can't thank you enough. Just tremendous sharing and so much influence over the game. And I thank you for all that you do for the game.
No, well, thank you, Chris. This is a real treat and an honor for me to be on the pod. If you think about some of the coaches that have preceded myself, it's quite humbling. The work you do through basketball immersion, both digitally on the website and of course on the pod, I'd certainly encourage coaches to explore membership with Basketball Immersion. It's a tool we use here in Basketball Australia a lot. And it's just so much fun to connect and to share some time.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Coach.
No worries, mate.
To find out more about Coach and all we spoke about today, please take a look at the show notes for today's episode. I love to share the game and have basketball coaching conversations, so connect with me on social media. You can find all my social media information and all your membership, clinic, and consulting needs at basketballimmersion.com. That concludes today's episode. I know there are so many podcasts out there. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Basketball Podcast with me, your host, Chris Oliver. Please subscribe and share the podcast with your friends and colleagues so that we can keep bringing you the best of what's out there and share the game.